It was supposed to be an ordinary family dinner, just a quiet evening to celebrate my husband's birthday with his family and a few friends. I had spent hours cooking his favorite dishes, setting up the table with candles, and trying to create the perfect atmosphere for a peaceful night. But as soon as I walked into the room, I knew things weren't going to be simple. I could feel the tension in the air, even before anyone spoke. Let me introduce you to my family. My husband, Daniel, is 35 years old. He's a successful businessman who works as a partner at a law firm. He has always been the charming, well-dressed type, the kind of guy everyone admires from the outside. Then there's me, Alexa, 32, a writer by profession and a stay-at-home mom to our 2 children, Lily, 7, and Noah, 5. I've always taken pride in being a supportive wife and mother, but that night, everything changed. Then there's my sister-in-law, Rachel, who's 29 and works as an event planner. She's always been a little dramatic, but I never expected her to be the one to unravel my world. And, of course, my mother-in-law, Margaret, who's 58 and a retired school teacher. She's the type to hold grudges and still hold on to a bit of old-fashioned thinking. She's not one for confrontation and tries to keep the peace at all costs. We were all sitting around the dining table, talking about the usual things, work, kids, the weather, until Rachel suddenly stood up, her face pale but her voice sharp. She pointed directly at me, then turned to Daniel, and screamed, "Your husband isn't your kid's father." The room went completely silent. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the blood rush to my head. My mother-in-law's face crumpled as if she had been slapped. She gasped, then let out a soft sob, clutching her handkerchief like it could shield her from the truth. Daniel froze, his fork hovered in midair, his eyes wide as if he had just been hit with a freight train. And I smirked. I couldn't help it. After everything I had endured, after all the secrets, the lies, the betrayal, it was almost poetic. I yanked an envelope from my purse and slapped it on the table in front of everyone. The silence deepened, the only sound the faint flicker of candlelight as the room waited for the storm to come. "You see," I said coolly, watching Daniel's face turn a shade lighter, "how ironic you bring that up." My mother-in-law's sobs grew louder, but it wasn't just because of the accusation Rachel had made. It was because Margaret had suspected something for months but had never dared to speak it aloud. The family was always so focused on the surface, never looking deeper, but Rachel had. And now, with that envelope, everything would be laid bare. Daniel's eyes darted from me to the envelope. I could see the panic rising within him. He tried to maintain his composure, but the cracks were showing. He didn't know what I knew, not yet, and I was going to enjoy every moment of his discomfort. He reached for the envelope but I pulled it away just out of reach. "I guess we'll find out who the father is, won't we?" I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and satisfaction. Rachel's face flushed with something between guilt and excitement, like she was reveling in the drama she had unleashed. "I had to do it, Alexa. I couldn't sit here and watch you live in ignorance." I laughed bitterly, meeting her eyes. "You think I've been living in ignorance? You really have no idea." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, rooted to his spot. He knew that I knew. The entire room waited for the truth to spill out, but I wasn't about to give it all away just yet. Instead, I turned to Rachel. "I have a lot to say about how this happened, but first, let's let Daniel explain himself." Daniel stood there, his hands gripping the edge of the table as though it could anchor him to reality. I could feel my pulse quicken, a mixture of fury and satisfaction bubbling inside me. My mother-in-law's sobs intensified, the sound almost unbearable, but I didn't let it distract me. I couldn't. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment everything fell apart. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His eyes darted nervously to Rachel, then back to me. I could see the guilt in his expression, but what really struck me, what made the air in the room feel so suffocating, was the realization that he wasn't denying it. He wasn't trying to cover up anything. He was frozen in a panic, unable to move forward, unable to even look me in the eye. And that's when the plot twist hit me. Rachel wasn't just stirring the pot for the sake of drama. No, something much more complicated was going on. Her eyes, wide and expectant, shifted uncomfortably as I watched her carefully. She wasn't smug like she should have been if she thought she had just dropped a bombshell on me. There was something in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. A nervous energy, like she wasn't entirely sure how this was going to play out. As though the truth she thought she was revealing was, in fact, something much darker than she anticipated. Then, as the silence grew unbearable, Rachel looked at Daniel, her gaze filled with a mixture of pity and regret. I didn't think it would come to this, Daniel, she said, her voice soft, almost trembling. I really didn't. That was when I knew Rachel wasn't the only one who had been hiding something. The room fell even quieter, if that was possible. My mother-in-law, still clutching her handkerchief, whispered, "What is happening? What does this mean?" And for the first time, Daniel spoke. His voice was strained, barely a whisper, but the words carried an undeniable weight. "Rachel, I never meant for you to get involved in this. But she deserves to know. Alexa deserves to know." My heart sank. She deserves to know. The words echoed in my head. Had he been prepared for this moment? Was he finally going to confess, or was he going to keep lying? I stared at him, feeling a strange numbness settle over me. The anger I had felt moments ago started to dissipate, replaced by something colder. Betrayal, yes, but also something else, something I hadn't expected. And then, without another word, he reached for the envelope I had placed on the table. His fingers were trembling, and he didn't even try to make eye contact as he opened it. The contents spilled out onto the table: a stack of papers, a few photographs, and a test result. DNA test results. The kind that proved something I hadn't dared to even think about. He didn't say a word as he slid the papers toward me, but I didn't need him to. I already knew. I knew that Rachel hadn't just been trying to ruin my life with that statement. No, she had been part of something much darker. A web of lies, deceit, and manipulation that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. The test results, clear as day, showed that Lily and Noah, my children, the two little souls I had poured my heart and soul into, weren't Daniel's. In fact, they weren't his at all. My eyes locked onto Daniel's for the first time since Rachel's outburst, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just guilty, he was terrified. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, my voice steady, though I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. He swallowed hard, his face pale as he nodded, but the shame on his face only seemed to make it worse. "I didn't want to hurt you, Alexa. I thought I could keep everything under control, but..." "Under control?" I interrupted, my voice rising, the anger creeping back in. "You thought you could keep this a secret from me? From our children?" I turned to Rachel, whose expression was now full of regret. "You knew too, didn't you? You've known this whole time. How long, Rachel? How long have you been keeping this from me?" Rachel opened her mouth, but she didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted back and forth, as though she were trying to find the right words. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't want to tell you. I wanted to protect you. I thought if you never knew, it would be better." But Daniel was falling apart. He couldn't keep pretending anymore. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, but I couldn't look away. Everything, the house, the dinner, the family, was crumbling right before my eyes. Daniel cleared his throat and stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he moved around the table. "I'm so sorry, Alexa. I never meant for you to find out like this, but I've been living a lie for years. I'm not proud of it, but this was never about you. It was about me, about my own mistakes. I should have told you a long time ago, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him not as my partner but as a stranger. His words, his apology, they didn't matter, because I realized something in that moment that shook me to my core. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about me, about how I had allowed myself to be manipulated, to be lied to for so long. And the worst part? I had been blind to it. I had trusted him with everything, my love, my children, my life, and he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. "You don't get to apologize, Daniel," I said coldly, the bitterness rising in my throat. "Not after everything. Not after what you've done." Rachel stepped back, glancing at me with guilt in her eyes. My mother-in-law was still crying softly, unable to comprehend the enormity of what had just been revealed. The reality was setting in for all of us, and there was no going back. Daniel looked at me, his expression pained, but he wasn't giving up. "Alexa, please. I'll do anything to make this right. We can fix this. We can work through this. I swear I'll be better. I'll be the husband and father you deserve." But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't something that could be fixed, not anymore, and that realization hit me harder than any betrayal could have. The moment Daniel spoke those words, "We can work through this," it felt like the final nail in the coffin. His desperation, his pleadings, his hollow promises, it all hit me like a tidal wave. Every word felt like a contradiction, like a lie wrapped in a veneer of hope. Because the truth was glaring at me, and it wasn't something you could just fix with a few kind words or heartfelt apologies. I took a step back, forcing myself to breathe, to process everything that had just been thrown at me. My mind was racing, but my heart was cold. It was like someone had ripped away the veil of illusion, and I could finally see everything clearly. For years, I had lived in a world of half-truths, built on the foundation of my trust in Daniel. And now, that trust was shattered. "Fix this." I repeated his words, letting the weight of them hang in the air like a curse. I couldn't even look at him properly. My gaze kept darting between the envelope on the table, the DNA test results, and Rachel, who was now looking at Daniel with an expression that seemed almost protective. I shook my head, pushing the thoughts of confusion and hurt away. This was about me now. This was about my future and the truth that had been hidden from me for far too long. Rachel, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, took a hesitant step forward. "Alexa, I know this is hard, but..." "No," I interrupted, holding up a hand to stop her. "You don't get to say anything. Not right now." Her face faltered, a flicker of regret flashing across her features, but she didn't say anything more. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was still sitting at the table, her eyes glazed, her emotions too tangled to form words. But she didn't need to speak. I knew she was just as broken by this revelation as I was. It was Daniel's face that demanded my attention now. He was standing there, shoulders slumped, his eyes pleading with me. "Please, Alexa, let's fix this." But every time I looked at him, I saw more than just my husband. I saw the man who had destroyed everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "You don't get to fix this, Daniel. Not after everything. Not after you lied to me about something as important as our children's father. I gave you everything, my trust, my love, my family, and you threw it all away for what? What was it? What was so important that you risked destroying our entire family?" His face contorted in pain, but I couldn't find any sympathy in myself for him. He opened his mouth to speak, but this time, I didn't give him the chance. "You think I don't know why you kept it a secret?" I said, my voice growing steadier with every word. "You were selfish. You were too scared to admit the truth because you knew it would ruin your perfect life. But I'm done. I'm done being the fool." I could see the crack in his facade, the one he had worked so hard to maintain. And as much as I wanted to see him crumble under the weight of his guilt, there was something else inside me, something I hadn't expected. Anger. A burning rage that had been simmering inside me for so long. I wasn't just angry at Daniel. I was furious at myself. Furious that I had been too blind, too trusting, to see the truth. I had been so focused on the life we had built together, on maintaining the illusion of a perfect family, that I had ignored the signs. I had ignored everything for the sake of keeping the peace. I turned away from him, the weight of my emotions pulling me down. I couldn't bear to be near him, to let his presence suffocate me like it had done for years. My fingers gripped the back of a chair, and for a moment, I just stood there, trying to hold it all together. "Alexa." His voice broke through the silence, and I could hear the desperation in it. "Please, don't leave me like this. I know I've messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear, I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. We can fix this. We can make our family whole again." His words were like nails on a chalkboard, each syllable more grating than the last. He didn't get it. He didn't understand. I turned back to him, my eyes cold. "You don't get to fix this, Daniel. Not after you've torn everything apart. You made this choice. You made it when you decided that your own desires were more important than the family we had. You made it when you thought lying to me would somehow protect me from the truth. But you were wrong, and now we have to deal with the consequences." Daniel's face twisted with pain, but there was no sympathy for him in my heart anymore. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how many apologies he gave, it wasn't going to change anything. "Where does that leave us?" he asked quietly, his voice broken. I could see the fear in his eyes now, the realization settling in that everything he had ever wanted was slipping through his fingers. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. For the first time, I wasn't the one begging for answers. I wasn't the one questioning my place in this marriage. I stood taller, trying to shake off the tremor in my voice. "It leaves us here, Daniel, in this moment. You and me, alone, and you can beg, you can plead. But the truth is, I can never unsee what you've done. I can never go back to the way things were." I saw him take a step toward me, his hand outstretched as if to comfort me, but I flinched away. He froze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved in his eyes. But it was fleeting, gone in an instant. "Is that it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this the end?" I didn't answer him immediately. I looked at him, really looked at him, and then at my children, who were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in the room. My heart ached for them, for everything they would have to face. They deserved better than this. They deserved better than the man I had once called my husband. "No," I finally said, my voice firm. "This isn't the end, Daniel, but it's the beginning of something else. Something for me, something for our children. And it's something you'll never be a part of." His face fell, the last shred of hope vanishing from his eyes. He opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand to silence him. "I've heard enough," I said. "You made your choice a long time ago. I'm making mine now." I turned my back on him then, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt thick with tension, with the weight of everything that had been said, everything that had been revealed. But there was a certain clarity in that moment. A clarity that I had never felt before. I wasn't the woman who had been blindly trusting in her marriage anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been content to live in the shadow of someone else's lies. I was Alexa, I was strong, and I was done. And as I walked out of that room, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur. Everything felt different, every room I walked into, every glance I shared with Daniel, every word that passed between us. My body moved through the motions, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that felt too distant, too cold for him to reach. I moved out of the bedroom. The house, which had once felt like our home, felt like a prison now. The echoes of our past life lingered in every corner, in every framed photograph of the family we used to be. But no matter how many times I looked at those pictures, I couldn't see the happy couple anymore. I couldn't even see the woman I had been before. The truth had cracked everything wide open, and I didn't know who I was anymore. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let him break me. Not again. Daniel had been relentless, constantly trying to talk to me, apologizing over and over, explaining how much he regretted everything. But I had stopped listening. I didn't want his apologies anymore. They meant nothing to me. Every time he opened his mouth, I could feel my stomach turn in disgust. The lies, the deceit, it was all too much. I couldn't unsee it. But despite my resolve, there was a part of me, deep down, that still felt something for him. The part that remembered the man I had once loved, the man I thought I had built a future with. It was a faint memory now, buried beneath the weight of everything he had done, but it was there, and I hated it, because that part of me wanted to believe him. It wanted to believe that we could still work through this, that we could salvage what was left. But that part of me was dying a slow death, and I refused to let it be reborn. The first time I saw him after that night, after everything had been laid bare, was on the morning of his birthday, of all days. He had come into the kitchen, his eyes swollen from a sleepless night, his face drawn in a way I had never seen before. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered everything. "Alexa," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't do this. I can't lose you. Please, let's fix this. Let's fix everything." I didn't even look at him. I focused on the coffee I was pouring, the soft sound of the liquid hitting the mug. I didn't need to hear his voice to know what he was going to say. His words were predictable now. His apologies were just noise, nothing more. "Daniel," I said, my voice flat, "we don't have anything to fix. Not anymore. You've made your choice, and so have I." He took a step closer, his desperation palpable. "I was wrong, okay? I've admitted that. What else do you want from me? What more can I say?" I didn't answer right away. I had nothing left to say. The truth was too painful, too raw. The damage had been done, and no amount of words would change that. And honestly, there was something inside me now that was glad for it. Glad that the weight of the truth had come crashing down, even if it meant the end of us. Because living in that lie, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, had been suffocating me for years. It had stolen pieces of myself, pieces of my joy. And now, with everything out in the open, I could finally breathe. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. Not anymore. "You should leave, Daniel," I said, my voice unshakable. "I need space. I need time to think, to figure out what I'm doing next." His face crumpled as though I had physically struck him. It was hard to watch, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. I needed to be strong, to stand firm in the face of everything he had put me through, because if I let myself feel sorry for him now, I would lose everything. "I can't leave, Alexa. You're my wife. You're my family," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, don't make me do this." But the truth was, it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. It was about my own survival, my own healing. I couldn't keep putting his needs above mine. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay. I wasn't okay. And I wasn't going to be okay until I could reclaim my life, myself. I turned to face him then, finally meeting his eyes. "You need to leave, Daniel. And not just the room. I mean, you need to leave. I can't do this anymore." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me as if I had just asked him to walk off the edge of the world. His eyes flickered with disbelief, with hurt, but there was also a trace of something else, something darker. A threat, a hint of anger. But it didn't scare me anymore. "Fine," he said, his voice quiet and cold. "If that's what you want. But don't think for a second that I'm giving up on us." I watched him leave the kitchen, his steps heavy with the weight of his failure. And when the door to the house clicked shut behind him, a strange feeling washed over me. Not relief, not happiness, just a deep, hollow emptiness. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know if I was proud of myself for finally standing up to him or terrified of what was coming next. The house felt quieter without him. I didn't know if that was a good thing or not. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. All I knew was that everything was different. I was different. And the person I had been before, the trusting wife, the mother who thought everything was okay, was gone. Replaced by a woman who had been tested in the worst possible way and who had learned to survive it. But as I stood there, staring out the window at the emptiness of the backyard, a part of me realized something else. Maybe, just maybe, I had been living in a lie for too long, but now I was free. I was free to rebuild my life, to rebuild myself. And that was the only thing that mattered. That evening, I gathered Lily and Noah into my arms, holding them close as they chatted about their day. They were oblivious to the chaos that had just torn through our family, blissfully unaware of the war that was still raging in my heart. And for a brief moment, I let myself forget. I let myself be their mother, just their mother, nothing more. Because as long as I had them, I had a reason to keep going. But the truth was, this wasn't just about them. This was about me, too. And I was finally starting to realize that I had the strength to fight for what was rightfully mine. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope again, not for a perfect family, not for reconciliation with Daniel, but for the chance to rebuild my own life, my own happiness, no matter how long it took. The weeks that followed Daniel's departure were a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, relief, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I couldn't ignore the fact that a part of me was still grieving, not just for the life I thought I had, but for the man I once loved, for the dreams we had built together. But the reality of what had happened, of what he had done, refused to let me stay in the past. I thought I could handle being alone. I thought I was ready for the challenge. I thought I could move on with my life, finding some sense of peace amidst the wreckage. But the truth, as it always does, had a way of creeping back into my life when I least expected it. The children, as always, were my anchor. Lily and Noah were innocent in all of this, too young to understand the gravity of what had happened, too innocent to feel the pain that weighed heavily on me. They needed me, and I was determined not to let them see me crumble. But even in the moments I had with them, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I was living in a constant state of uncertainty, wondering if I had made the right decision. I told myself I had. I reminded myself of the truth, the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation. But still, there was a lingering doubt that whispered to me in the quiet moments, asking, what if you were too harsh? What if you could have fixed this? But then I would remember the DNA test results, the proof that the children weren't Daniel's. That was the part that hurt the most, the part that I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the years I had spent raising children that weren't even his. Years of pretending, of believing that we had this perfect family, when all along I was blind to the truth. That's when it happened, when I found out the worst of it. It started with a simple text message, an innocuous conversation on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the couch, the kids in the other room, when my phone buzzed with a notification. The message was from one of Daniel's old friends, Ben, someone I hadn't spoken to in ages. At first, I thought nothing of it. I opened the message casually, just expecting a quick greeting or an update. But what I read made my stomach churn. I can't believe Daniel is still pretending like everything is fine with you. Does he not realize how much damage he's caused? I mean, really, how long can you keep lying to her, Dan? It was like a punch to the gut. The words were cryptic, unsettling, but there was no denying the implication. Daniel was still lying, about what? I felt the ground shift beneath me as I tried to process the message. What the hell was Ben talking about? Still lying? I clicked on the message, trying to read between the lines, but it didn't give me anything more concrete. There was no follow-up, no explanation, just the unsettling sense that something was off. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. Had Daniel really been lying to me all this time? Had he been playing some sick game where he didn't just betray me once, but had been covering his tracks for years? I had to know. I had to get to the bottom of this. And that meant confronting the one person who had been deceiving me for far too long. Later that evening, when the kids were settled into bed, I sent Daniel a message. It was direct, simple, but the words carried the weight of everything I had been holding back. We need to talk. Now. It didn't take long for him to respond, and before long, he was at the door. His face, when I opened it, was a mask of guilt and desperation. But I didn't let that sway me. Not anymore. Alexa, please, he started, before I even had a chance to speak. I know you're still angry, and I understand why, but I swear, I'm not lying to you anymore. I never wanted any of this to happen. I let him talk, his words flowing out like a flood, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't hearing his apology, because I knew what he was capable of, and I knew that any words that came from him now would be tainted by lies. Finally, I cut him off. You're still lying, aren't you? He froze, his eyes wide in surprise. What are you talking about? I swear, I've been honest with you. No, I said, interrupting him, my voice cold and cutting. You haven't. Not since the beginning. And now I know there's more. So stop pretending like you're still the good guy in all of this. Ben's message. I saw it. I know you're still hiding something. And I need to know what it is. Daniel's face shifted. The veneer of guilt fell away, replaced by something darker. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else, something I couldn't quite place. And that feeling, that small moment of clarity, told me everything I needed to know. Ben doesn't know what he's talking about, Daniel said quickly, almost too quickly. There's nothing more to tell. I've already told you everything. The affair is over. I've been trying to fix things, Alexa. Trying to make it right. I could feel my pulse quicken. Trying to make it right. You think this can be fixed? You think we can be fixed? He didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered toward the ground, his shoulders slumped. And that's when I saw it, the small, subtle shift in his expression that told me everything. He wasn't just hiding the truth about the affair, there was something else. I didn't want to hurt you, he said quietly, But you need to understand. I didn't just cheat on you, Alexa. I've been lying about everything. The affair wasn't just one person. There were others, too." My chest tightened. "Others?" I stood there, frozen, as he continued, his voice low, almost apologetic. "I've been seeing someone else, someone you don't know. And I've been paying her to keep quiet, to cover up what I did." I couldn't breathe. My head spun as the truth settled over me, layer by layer. Other women? Paying them to stay silent? The man I had been married to 4 years, the man I had trusted with my children, with my life, he wasn't just a cheater. He was a monster. The anger surged inside me, hotter than anything I had ever felt before. "You think you can just keep doing this? You think you can just lie and manipulate everyone in your life for your own selfish gain?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, but I didn't need him to. I didn't need to hear his excuses anymore. The truth was out, and there was no going back. He had continued to cheat, to manipulate me, and all the while, he had been lying to everyone around him. I had already made up my mind. This wasn't about fixing things anymore. It wasn't about salvaging a relationship that had been shattered beyond repair. It was about taking back control, taking back my life, my dignity, my future. And that's when I knew I was done. I turned away from him, my heart pounding, my head swimming with the reality of everything he had done. The truth had set me free, but it had also shown me something else. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was empowered. Empowered to take back what was mine. Empowered to leave behind the man who had only ever brought pain into my life. I looked back at Daniel one last time, my voice steady. "You're not the man I married, and you never will be again." He stood there, motionless, as I walked out of the room, my resolve firm. This was the end, and no matter what he said or did, I was never going back to that life. The days that followed were filled with a mix of exhaustion and clarity. My life, once so carefully constructed, now felt like a house of cards, toppled, broken, and scattered all around me. I had thrown away the last remnants of my marriage with Daniel, but in doing so, I had also thrown away a part of myself I had never truly realized was still clinging to the idea of us. I could feel the weight of the decision every moment, especially as I watched my kids, their innocence unscathed by the drama unfolding around them, blissfully unaware of the war that had just torn their world apart. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on them, the truth kept gnawing at me. It wasn't just the betrayal, the lies, or even the fact that Daniel had been unfaithful. What truly stung, what truly shook me to my core, was the realization that I had been completely blindsided. My trust, my faith in everything I thought was true, had been shredded into pieces. The idea that I had spent years with a man who could deceive me in such a brutal way, who could keep secrets from me for so long, had shattered any illusion of security I had left. The question haunted me every night: how could I have been so blind? But as time passed, as I began to dig through the wreckage of our relationship, I realized something else, something that made my heart race with anticipation. My anger, which had been boiling beneath the surface, began to crystallize into something else. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about how Daniel had lied or cheated or manipulated me. It was about justice. It was about making him feel what I felt, the crushing weight of deception, of being made to look like a fool for so long. And that's when it hit me: I couldn't let him get away with it. I couldn't let him slink back into his life, continuing his lies, pretending he was the victim when, in reality, he had been playing me all along. No, this wasn't going to end with me silently moving on, licking my wounds. This was going to end with him facing the consequences of his actions. So, I started planning. The first thing I did was cut off all contact with Daniel. No more late-night apologies, no more heartfelt pleas for reconciliation. I blocked his number, erased every trace of him from my social media, and avoided mutual friends who might still try to act as mediators. The only communication that remained was through my lawyer, who I had contacted immediately after my confrontation with Daniel. I needed to make sure everything was documented. I needed to make sure there was a paper trail that could be used to expose him if necessary. But that wasn't enough for me. I knew I had to hit him where it would hurt the most: his reputation. It wasn't just the affair that had hurt me. It was the fact that he had used me, manipulated me, and lied to everyone around us. To his friends, to his family, to his colleagues, and even worse, he had created this image of the perfect husband, the devoted father, while secretly living a double life. That was the part I couldn't live with. He had pretended to be something he wasn't, and in doing so, he had robbed me of my dignity and my sense of self-worth. But I had a plan. I reached out to some of Daniel's closest friends, people I had known for years, people who had been part of our lives, people who had sat around our dinner table, shared stories, and laughed with us during holidays. I wanted to expose the truth to them, let them know what Daniel had been hiding, the lies he had been feeding to everyone. And I knew exactly where to start. I contacted Maggie, one of Daniel's closest friends. Maggie and I had always gotten along well, and I knew she would be devastated when she found out the truth. But I also knew she would be one of the first people to take action. Maggie worked as a journalist for a well-known local paper, and while she had always respected my privacy, I knew that if anyone could help expose the lies Daniel had been living, it was her. I met Maggie at a coffee shop one afternoon, not wanting to do anything that would raise suspicions. She looked at me with concern as soon as she saw me. The last time we had spoken, everything had seemed fine, at least, from the outside. But now, there was a look in my eyes that she didn't recognize. She could tell something had happened. "You okay?" Maggie asked, her voice soft but filled with that familiar concern. I took a deep breath. "No, Maggie, I'm not okay. And I need your help." I told her everything, how I had uncovered Daniel's lies, the affair, the other women, the way he had been lying to all of us. Maggie's face turned pale as I spoke, her eyes widening with disbelief. She couldn't believe it at first. The man I had been married to, the man she had known as a good friend, he wasn't the person he had portrayed himself to be. She was shocked, horrified even, by the extent of his betrayal. But after a long silence, she finally spoke. "I'll help you," Maggie said, her voice resolute. "This needs to be known. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. You deserve justice. You deserve the truth to come out." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Daniel anymore, it was about taking back control of my own story, of my own life. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how ugly it was. But even as I began working with Maggie to expose Daniel, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. I had been looking for answers from Daniel, expecting him to come clean on his own, but I realized that would never happen. He would never admit to everything he had done. He would never face the full scope of his actions. So, I had to take matters into my own hands. I had to make sure his lies were revealed to everyone, his family, his friends, his colleagues. That's when I remembered the secret account. During the last months of our marriage, I had noticed strange charges on our credit card statements, payments to various hotels, expensive dinners, and weekend getaways I had never been a part of. I had asked Daniel about them before, but he had brushed it off, claiming business trips and necessary meetings. But now, I realized those charges were connected to his affairs. I knew the name of the hotel where he had booked one of his weekend escapes. It was a place where he and his mistress had spent a considerable amount of time, a place I never even knew existed. I went there, pretending to be a guest, and asked the staff if they had any records of a recent booking under Daniel's name. After a few awkward moments, they pulled up a record of his stay with a woman, one I had never heard of before. The details, the dates, it all matched up perfectly. Armed with this evidence, I knew I had the final piece. It was time to go public. Daniel wasn't just going to walk away from this unscathed. He wasn't just going to continue pretending he was the victim. I was going to make sure everyone knew who he truly was. But this wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my power, about showing him that he didn't control me anymore, that his lies had no power over me. I could feel the weight of my decision, the gravity of the actions I was about to take. But deep down, I knew this was what I had to do. This was the only way to fully move on, to fully heal. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had gotten away with everything. But he didn't know that I was just getting started. I had spent weeks plotting, meticulously putting every piece of the puzzle in place. Each day, I felt my anger build in new ways, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that Daniel had believed he could escape the consequences of his actions so easily. I had been so blind before, believing the lies he fed me, but now, I wasn't just a victim. I was a force to be reckoned with. I had become someone unrecognizable, not just to Daniel, but to myself as well. The woman who had once believed in love, in trust, in the sanctity of marriage, had morphed into something else. Someone who would stop at nothing to make sure the truth was exposed, no matter the cost. I knew that Daniel would fight back, he would try to save face, to lie his way out of it. But he had underestimated me. He had underestimated the fury that I had cultivated, the quiet rage that had grown from his betrayal into something much more dangerous. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about showing him, showing everyone, that I was not a doormat. I was not someone to be toyed with. The first step of my plan was the public release of the information. It wasn't just going to be a quiet whisper or a backdoor message. It needed to be loud. It needed to be everywhere. Maggie had come through for me in ways I hadn't even imagined. She had the connections, the resources, and the experience to get the story out there, fast and hard. The article she published wasn't just about Daniel's affair, it was about his double life, the manipulation, the lies, the women he had used, and the people he had hurt. She had documented it all, his lies, his attempts to cover up his affairs, his deceitful dealings at work, even his business trips that were nothing more than excuses for his infidelity. The details were staggering, and there was nowhere for him to hide. When the article hit the news, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted once again. The phone rang constantly, friends, family, even people I hadn't heard from in years, reaching out to express their shock, their sympathy, and their disbelief. But through all of it, I felt a strange sense of power. This was no longer about me being the victim. This was me reclaiming my narrative. This was me standing tall, telling the world that Daniel had not won. The reactions were swift. The first came from his family. His mother, who had always been a little too involved in our relationship, called me in a frenzy. "Alexa, how could you do this? How could you air your dirty laundry for the world to see?" Her voice trembled, a mixture of anger and disbelief. I didn't hesitate. "How could he do this? You think I'm airing dirty laundry? He's been lying to you, to all of us, for years. He's not the man you think he is. You've been so blinded by your own love for him, you didn't see it. But now, everyone will know." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke, her voice smaller now. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied coldly, "but you'll have to face the truth, just like I did." The next blow came when Daniel's colleagues at work found out. He had built his career on the idea of being a trustworthy, family-oriented man. His perfect life had been part of his brand. When the article hit, it was like a bomb went off in his professional world. I'd received multiple calls from former colleagues and even some of his business partners, people who had once respected him, wondering if it was true, if the accusations were legitimate. One of his former business partners, a man named Alex, reached out to me privately. "Alexa," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you have to understand. We had no idea about any of this. We thought he was exactly who he said he was. He built this entire company on that image." "I know," I replied, my voice steady but fierce. "I did, too." It didn't take long for the dominoes to start falling. Daniel's good guy persona began to unravel in the public eye. His co-workers, his friends, even his clients began distancing themselves from him. The whisper started to spread, and the once prominent businessman who had claimed to have it all was suddenly left standing in the rubble of his own lies. But for me, that wasn't enough. Watching him lose his career and his reputation was satisfying, yes, but it didn't feel like justice. It didn't feel like the end of his deceitful game. There was something more, something deeper that I had yet to confront. I knew that Daniel's response would come soon, and I wasn't wrong. It came in the form of a legal threat. His lawyer reached out to mine, demanding I take down the article, claiming defamation and threatening to sue for damages. They wanted me to back off, to retract the truth I had shared, but there was no way I was going to let that happen. Instead, I hired my own lawyer, someone who specialized in these kinds of cases. And just as I had anticipated, Daniel's lawyer began pushing back harder, but I didn't back down. I was ready for this fight. I was prepared to take it all the way. In the meantime, I continued to play my part. I kept a cool head in public, never letting my emotions show. At home, I was the same steady, calm mother my kids needed. But inside, I was a whirlwind of emotion. Anger, resentment, guilt, power, sometimes all at once. I kept pushing forward, knowing that I had the upper hand now. But I wasn't just going to wait for him to make the next move. I was going to force him into a corner, a place where he could no longer lie his way out of the situation. There was one more piece of the puzzle I needed to expose. It was the woman, the one who had been part of his affair all along. She had been a part of his life for months, maybe even years, and yet I had never met her. I didn't even know her name until Maggie found it in the investigation. But once I had it, I knew I had to act fast. I tracked her down. Her name was Vanessa. She was young, in her late 20s, and had been working as a personal assistant for one of Daniel's business contacts. When I first reached out to her, I wasn't sure what to expect. She could have easily ignored me or turned defensive. But instead, when I contacted her directly, she responded with shock and a little fear. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I just want the truth," I replied. "I want you to tell me everything. About Daniel, about the affair, about what he promised you." It took some time, but eventually, she agreed to meet. When we sat across from each other in a small cafe, she seemed hesitant at first, but the more she spoke, the more she revealed about Daniel's manipulation. She told me how he had promised her everything, promised her a life of luxury and excitement, only to manipulate her the same way he had manipulated me. She confessed that she had no idea Daniel was still married when they began their affair, and when she found out, she was furious, but didn't know how to leave him. He had a way of making people feel trapped, of making them feel like they owed him something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman, who had been an accomplice in his lies, was just as much a victim of his manipulation as I had been. And yet, there was something else in her eyes when she spoke, a glimmer of regret, of guilt, of knowing that she had helped destroy a life. She wasn't proud of what she had done, but the damage was already done. The betrayal was complete, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me getting revenge on Daniel. This wasn't just about tearing down his world and making him face his lies. It was about healing. It was about making sure that Daniel could never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to ensure that he could never lie his way into someone else's life again. So, I did what any woman who had been lied to for too long would do. I made sure that the truth, his truth, was out there for the world to see. It was the ultimate punishment, not just exposing him to the people closest to him, but exposing him to everyone he had ever deceived. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The dust had settled, but the aftermath of my actions was anything but quiet. The firestorm that had erupted from the publication of Daniel's secret still raged, but the worst of it was over. At least, on the surface, it seemed like it was. Daniel's reputation was shattered, his career in ruins, his marriage with me irrevocably broken. But as I took a step back and surveyed the wreckage, I realized that this was only the beginning of what would be the hardest part of all, the rebuilding. After the article went viral, Daniel was forced to publicly acknowledge the truth. His attempts to sue for defamation were immediately quashed when his own actions were laid bare for the world to see. His legal team backed down when it became clear that they had no case, and soon, the public backlash against him was so fierce that his corporate sponsors began dropping him one by one. It wasn't just his work life that was destroyed, it was his entire identity. The man he had built himself up to be, the family man, the perfect husband and father, was no longer recognizable. The public turned against him, and even his close friends and family began distancing themselves from him. It wasn't just the affair that had caused his downfall, it was his duplicity, his cruelty, his utter disregard for anyone else but himself. But even as Daniel's world crumbled around him, there was something I couldn't shake, a sense of emptiness. Was this really justice? Was this what I had fought for? I had wanted revenge, sure, but now that I had it, I found myself standing at the crossroads of what came next. I had spent so much time focusing on him, on the lies, on the exposure, that I had neglected to think about the path I was going to walk after all of this was over. I had never imagined how long it would take to truly heal from the years of emotional abuse, from the gaslighting, from the betrayal that had taken root in every corner of my life. The anger I had held onto for so long had burned so hot, it had become part of me. But in the aftermath, that fire started to die down, and all that was left was a cold emptiness, a lingering sorrow. I had won, sure, but the victory didn't feel as satisfying as I had expected. Daniel tried to reach out a few times after everything unfolded, calls, messages, even showing up at my door unannounced. I didn't answer, not at first, but one day, I found myself staring at my phone, his name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. It wasn't about him anymore, it wasn't about what he had done or hadn't done. It was about me. It was about my healing, my peace of mind. I answered. His voice, shaky and remorseful, crackled through the line. "Alexa, I'm so sorry. I've messed everything up. I've ruined my life, ruined ours. I don't even know how to fix this. Please, just give me a chance to explain." I cut him off before he could go any further. "There's nothing to explain, Daniel. Everything you needed to say, you said when you betrayed me. I don't need any more of your words. They don't mean anything now." There was a long silence, one that hung in the air like a heavy fog. I knew he was hurting. I knew he felt the weight of what had happened. But that wasn't my problem anymore. "You ruined my trust, Daniel," I continued, my voice steady but firm. "You shattered everything we had, and you can't put that back together with an apology. I've spent too many years trying to understand you, trying to believe in us, and now all that's left is what I've built for myself. I'm moving on. Without you." I hung up the phone without giving him a chance to respond. The decision to end that conversation, to sever the last thread that had tied me to him, felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was liberating. The days that followed were filled with an overwhelming sense of freedom that I hadn't known in years. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could finally see clearly, see who I was, what I had endured, and what I was capable of. The woman who had spent years trying to hold on to a shattered marriage, trying to make sense of the madness Daniel had put her through, was no longer bound by the constraints of the past. I was free. But freedom, as it turned out, was not without its own challenges. There were still the kids, my greatest source of joy, but also my greatest concern. How do you explain to your children that their father, the man they had adored, was no longer the person they thought he was? How do you shield them from the fallout of your broken marriage when they are too young to fully understand the depths of betrayal? I spent hours talking to them, gently guiding them through their confusion and hurt. I told them the truth, but in a way they could process, in a way that wouldn't make them feel like they were caught in the middle of a war zone. I made it clear that, despite everything, their father still loved them, but I also emphasized that love wasn't enough to justify the things he had done. I made sure they knew that I would always be there for them, that we would be okay no matter what. And slowly, piece by piece, we began to heal together. As for my own healing, I took the time I needed. I focused on my career, something that had been put on hold for far too long. I rebuilt the parts of myself that had been neglected in the years of trying to make a broken marriage work. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and started dating again, not with the intention of finding someone to replace Daniel, but to rediscover myself and my worth as an individual. I had spent too many years defining myself through the lens of someone else's lies. Now, I was taking the time to rediscover who I was, what I wanted, and what would make me happy. Through it all, I learned one vital lesson, the hardest, but the most necessary one of all: revenge doesn't heal wounds. It might feel sweet in the moment, it might satisfy your need for justice, but in the long run, it's only the beginning of the healing process. The real work, the real recovery, came from within me. It came from choosing to move forward, from choosing to let go of the anger and the bitterness, and from choosing to embrace my new life. Daniel's life continued to spiral. Without his carefully crafted image, he was nothing. The women he had betrayed him with were gone. His friends had all abandoned him, and his family, as much as they tried to defend him, couldn't look at him the same way. He had to live with the reality of what he had done, and, in a way, that was the greatest revenge of all. Not because I had exposed him, but because the truth had destroyed him from the inside out. In the end, the victory wasn't in the public fallout, or the court victories, or the destruction of his world. It was in my ability to rebuild mine. The aftermath wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, I finally felt like I was in control. The worst was over. Now, I was free.